They promise that healing will make you a gentler, kinder person, a creature of unwavering peace, and you believe them because that promise sounds like paradise to a weary soul. But Carl Jung, the man who had the courage to navigate the darkest and deepest waters of the human psyche, discovered a truth that shatters this illusion of passive goodness completely. An empath who truly heals doesn't become a more sympathetic version of themselves. They become dangerous. Not dangerous to the innocent, nor to those seeking truth, but dangerous in a way that deeply terrifies anyone who ever dared to use them. Let me show you what Jung identified as the most unexpected and formidable transformation in human psychology. When an empath finally integrates their shadow and crosses that invisible threshold from wounded healer to sovereign of self, they don't just change, they become untouchable. And it is precisely this sudden shift in frequency that keeps manipulators awake at night. But before we delve into the terrifying power of what a healed empath becomes, we need to confront with brutal honesty what they were and why that previous existence nearly cost them their lives. The unhealed empath exists in the world as what depth psychology would call an emotional shock absorber. Imagine a biological and spiritual mechanism designed to absorb impact after impact, protecting everyone else from the raw force of life while slowly and silently destroying itself in the process. If you're listening to this, you know exactly what it's like. These individuals spent years, perhaps decades, absorbing the emotional chaos of everyone around them, the pent-up anger of their alcoholic father, the silent, suffocating depression of their mother, the infidelity of their partner that you could feel vibrating in the air months before seeing any physical proof, or the envy of that coworker masked as concern. You absorbed it all, not because you wanted to, but because your nervous system was built like a high-precision antenna, picking up every frequency of pain within its reach. Jung called this phenomenon unconscious participation, or psychic contagion. You weren't just feeling your own emotions, you were carrying the entire unconscious weight of the people around you, the shadows they denied, the pain they refused to process, the traumas they hid. All of this was dumped inside you, as if your soul were some kind of cosmic garbage dump destined to recycle. Human suffering, and the most tragic part wasn't the pain itself. The worst part was that you believed this was your sacred purpose. You believed that your sensitivity, your almost supernatural ability to feel everything, meant you had a duty to fix everyone, save everyone, keep everyone safe. You built your entire identity around being the strong person, the person who endured what others couldn't, the therapist friend, the emotional translator, the one who always understood and forgave. But here's the secret. No one told you while you were sacrificing yourself on the altar of uncontrolled empathy. While you were busy absorbing the darkness of others, you were systematically ignoring your own light and your own needs. You had no boundaries because boundaries seemed cruel. You had no barriers because barriers seemed selfish. You said yes with a smile on your face when your soul screamed no. You stayed in places and relationships where every cell in your body begged you to run. And slowly, so slowly you didn't even realize it was happening. You disappeared. The real self was buried under layers and layers of other people's unprocessed emotions. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly in his clinical practice. Empaths who came to him not because they were mentally ill, but because they were drowning in a sea of consciousness that didn't even belong to them. Consider the profile Jung documented so many times. The intuitive individual who would enter a room and immediately sense the heavy psychological atmosphere, who was lying, who was in pain, who harbored secret resentments. But this gift didn't bring peace, it brought chronic exhaustion. They couldn't maintain superficial conversations because they saw through every social facade. They couldn't maintain false friendships because people felt exposed around them. Even without a word being spoken, Jung realized he wasn't treating a pathology, but observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious for normal social survival. The ability to see everything becomes the very thing that isolates you from everyone. But then, something happens in this empath's life, a catalyst event. Jung called it a breaking point, but that term is too mild to describe the reality. It's not a collapse. It's a breakthrough disguised as total destruction, the moment when the old structure needs to burn so that something new can be born from the ashes. And what happens next isn't just recovery, it is the birth of a force that the world is not prepared to face. Generally, this transformation doesn't come with warning or gentle preparation. It arrives like a blow from the dark, a betrayal you never expected, coming from the very direction you never looked at with suspicion. Jung called this stage the dark night of the soul, but for you, on your living room floor or in the deafening silence of an empty room, it feels like the end of the world. Perhaps you discover that the person you confided your deepest secrets to has been lying for years with frightening ease. Perhaps you realize, with sudden and nauseating clarity, that the family member you protected and justified your whole life never saw you as a human being, but only as a resource, a battery to be drained to the last drop. Or perhaps it's the moment you see the satisfied smile on someone's face as you crumble, and understand that your suffering is not an accident for them, but their sustenance. It is in this exact moment of excruciating pain that the dark magic happens. The predictable script would say that the empath, sensitive and fragile, would completely break down, fall into a deep depression, or lose their sanity. But Jung knew that the human psyche holds ancient secrets. What happens is not a collapse, but a cold and absolute awakening. Something inside you snaps. It's not the sound of something breaking, it's the sound of a lock being opened. The veil that your compassion kept over your eyes falls, and for the first time, you don't see people's potential. You see the raw reality. You stop looking at who they could be if they were healed and start looking at who they have chosen to be now. And here is the unexpected twist, the piece of the puzzle that Jung identified as crucial. During all those years when you thought you were just passively absorbing emotions, suffering and crying over the pain of others, a hidden part of your mind was doing something entirely different. You were studying. Unknowingly, you were operating as an undercover spy in hostile territory. Your unconscious mind was cataloging, mapping, and recording human behavior with the cold precision of a master strategist. Every time someone said one thing but the energy conveyed another, you filed it away. Every micro-expression of contempt that crossed your partner's face before they said, "I love you," you filed it away. Every subtle shift in tone of voice that preceded an outburst of anger or a manipulation of guilt, you filed it away. You knew everything all along. You saw everything all along. The only difference is that before, you used your energy to suppress this knowledge, to doubt your intuition, to maintain peace at all costs. You told yourself you were imagining things, that you were being paranoid, that you should be more understanding. But the final betrayal burns that doubt to ashes. Jung described this process as the integration of the shadow, and it's vital to understand that your shadow is not evil. The shadow is simply everything you've been taught to repress in order to be a good person. It's your sharp intelligence that knows how to identify a predator. It's your healthy anger that knows when a boundary has been crossed. It's your ability to say no without feeling guilty. It's your talent for seeing through lies in real time. When the empath stops fighting their own shadow and invites it in, the transformation is instantaneous and irreversible. That knowledge accumulated over decades, that vast database about human nature that you've built suddenly comes online. Access is granted. The inner voice that whispered, "Beware," now speaks with the authority of thunder. The empath who spent decades doubting their perceptions suddenly stops doubting. The clarity that emerges from this state is not euphoric. It is sober, metallic, and unwavering. You look at the same people who manipulated you yesterday, and today their tactics seem childish, transparent, almost ridiculous. You can predict what they will say before they open their mouths. You know which emotional button they will try to push because you've seen them do it hundreds of times. But now, the button has been deactivated. Where before there was an open wound waiting to be touched, now there is new, impenetrable skin. Jung called this becoming psychologically whole. You cease to be fragmented, divided between what you feel and what you know. Feeling and knowledge merge. And when this fusion happens, when the compassionate heart unites with the strategic mind, 3 stages of power begin to unfold naturally, effortlessly. You don't need to force anything. It's an organic evolution of consciousness. And the first of these stages is so disturbing to those accustomed to controlling you that they often question whether you are still the same person. The truth? You are not. You died and were reborn as something they don't have the tools to understand. And so, emerging from the ashes of that fundamental betrayal, the first of the three great powers manifests itself, irrevocably altering the dynamics of all its relationships. Jung, in his profound studies on the alchemy of the psyche, knew that true transformation does not occur in a straight line, but in quantum leaps of consciousness. The first leap, the one that defines the empath's new existence, is what we call the mirror effect. To understand the visceral magnitude of this change, you need to visualize how you operated before. You were a sponge, absorbing every drop of emotional poison to cleanse the environment. But now, the physics of your soul has changed. You have ceased to be an absorbent surface and have become a reflective, polished, relentless, and crystalline surface. And there is nothing more disturbing for a human being living a lie than being confronted with the absolute truth of their own image. Let's illustrate this with a scenario you may know intimately, but which will now have a radically different outcome. Imagine that classic manipulator in your life, perhaps a critical relative, an abusive boss, or an ex-partner who always knew how to make you feel small. They enter the room bringing the usual chaos, that heavy cloud of demands and dissatisfaction. They cast the bait, as they have done 1,000 times before, a veiled criticism disguised as advice, or a phrase designed to trigger your guilt and make you apologize for something you didn't do. The old script would dictate that you shrink back, explain yourself, absorb the tension to fix the moment. But the healed empath no longer follows this script. Instead of absorbing the blow, you remain still. You don't react with anger, nor with sadness. You just look. You hold the gaze with a calmness bordering on the supernatural. In that silence, something terrifying happens to the manipulator. Because you didn't accept their projection, because you didn't take the emotional garbage they tried to deliver, that garbage hits your invisible barrier and returns directly to its source. Jung taught that everything we deny in ourselves, we project onto others. The narcissist projects their insecurity by calling you too sensitive. The liar projects their dishonesty by accusing you of betrayal. But when the empath becomes a mirror, the projection fails. And for the first time, the manipulator is forced to look inside themselves through your eyes. What they see is not you. It's the very ugliness they tried to hide. Their own envy, their own moral emptiness reflected in their serene indifference. It's a moment of pure psychological shock. You'll notice a physical change in them. They might stutter, look away, or more commonly, their anger will escalate rapidly. And here's a curious fact about human psychology that Jung repeatedly observed. When confronted with their own shadow, most unconscious people attack the mirror. They'll call you cold, arrogant, say that money has gone to your head, or that you're not the sweet person they knew anymore. And they're right. That sweet person, who was actually just permissive and fearful, is dead. What lies before them is someone who no longer needs to validate anyone's illusion to feel safe. You'll see the panic in their eyes, not because you screamed, but because you didn't. Your silence becomes a vacuum where their screams echo back, sounding hysterical and empty even to their own ears. The mirror effect is devastating because it removes the one thing every manipulator desperately needs to survive: your complicity in distorting reality. They need you to doubt what you saw. They need you to accept the distorted version of the facts. But the healed empath, armed with that database of human behavior they've built up over the years, now trusts their own eyes more than anyone else's words. When they try gaslighting, that cruel tactic of making you question your sanity, you no longer feel anguish. You feel, curiously, a kind of anthropological boredom. You observe the manipulation attempt like a scientist observes a rat in a maze, without emotional judgment, just noting the repetitive and predictable pattern. Ah, look, you think, he's using the victimhood tactic now. Fascinating. This internal separation, this ability to observe the game without becoming a piece on the board, is what makes the empath immune. And this immunity is what begins to dismantle the power structures around them. The abusive boss loses power when fear leaves the room. The toxic family member loses control when guilt no longer works. The mirror effect cleanses its environment not through war, but through revelation. People who cannot bear the truth about themselves simply cannot remain in the presence of a clean mirror for long. They begin to avoid you, to seek easier prey, or to distance themselves, repelled by your light that does not burn but reveals. And as they distance themselves, you realize that the space they leave is not one of solitude, but of freedom. But as soon as the mirror clears the ground, a new urgent need arises. Now that you see who is who, now that the masks have fallen, you need to decide who will be allowed to remain in your rebuilt life. And this is where the second power is born, an ability that many mistake for cruelty, but which is, in fact, the highest form of self-love. With the ground cleared by the mirror effect, where illusions have been shattered and manipulators have recoiled before their own image, a silent vacuum emerges. It is in this sacred space that the second power begins to rise, not as a wall of rough stone, but as an intelligent and selective membrane. Many mistake this stage for coldness or arrogance, but Jung, in his wisdom on the economy of the psyche, would immediately identify it as the vital preservation of libido, the life energy. The unhealed empath operated like a public square. Anyone could enter, pitch their tent, make noise, dirty the ground, and leave without paying anything. The door was always open because the idea of closing it seemed like a cardinal sin against their own generous nature. You believed that love meant unrestricted availability, a tap that never closed, regardless of who was holding the glass. But the empath who has integrated their shadow understands a fundamental alchemical truth. Energy is finite. You realize that every moment of attention given to an emotional vampire is a moment stolen from someone who truly matters, including yourself. The second power, therefore, is selective empathy. You cease to be an open door and transform into a guardian of the temple. The structure of your kindness changes. It ceases to be a right acquired by others and becomes a privilege granted by you. The guardian is not hostile, it is simply rigorous. It stands there at the threshold of your soul, demanding a password that only integrity, reciprocity, and respect can provide. For those who do not possess this currency, access is summarily denied. And this leads us to a question you may have avoided your whole life. How many times have you set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm? This transition from total availability to surgical selectivity causes a seismic shock in your social circle. People were used to your automatic yes to your pathological inability to disappoint. When you start saying no, a calm no, without long justifications, without stammered apologies, they short-circuit. They can't process that the well has run dry for them. But here lies the crucial distinction Jung would make between being sympathetic and being good. Sympathy is a social mask, often motivated by fear of rejection. Kindness, the true kindness of the soul, operates from truth, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do to a dysfunctional human being is to slam the door in their face, forcing them to deal with their own mess instead of dumping it on your living room. This requires a moral courage that few possess. You begin to practice unrelenting compassion. This means looking at someone you love, seeing that this person is creating their own suffering through poor choices, and having the strength not to intervene, not to save them, and not to cushion their fall. The old empath would rush to put mattresses on the floor. The healed empath knows that the pain of the fall is often the only teacher the person will listen to. You become capable of witnessing the suffering of others without being consumed by it, keeping your heart open but your hands withdrawn. It's a more mature, denser, and infinitely more difficult form of love than the previous complacency. But ask yourself, are you prepared to be seen as the villain in someone else's story? If that's the price to finally be the hero of your own narrative? For those who pass the Guardian's test, however, the experience is transformative. For people who respect their limits and honor their energy, you are not a desert, but an oasis, deeper than ever. Your empathy, now no longer wasted on those who don't deserve it, becomes focused, potent, and healing. You offer a quality presence that the exhausted empath of the past could never offer. But for emotional tourists, for opportunists, and for eternal victims, you become an impenetrable fortress. They bang, pry, demand, try to use the old keys of guilt and obligation, but the lock has been changed. You observe their drama from outside the walls, not with contempt, but with a necessary detachment. You understand that their urgency is not your emergency. This selectivity isn't based on whim, but on pattern recognition. And this is where the mystery deepens. You don't choose who enters and who leaves by flipping a coin. The Guardian's decision is informed by something far older and more precise than simple logic. You've developed a reading ability that dispenses with words. The healed empath doesn't need to wait for betrayal to happen to close the door. They smell betrayal on the person's clothes before they even enter the room. The screening is done in seconds, based on microsignals that most people ignore. And what happens when this reading ability reaches its peak? What happens when you not only protect the temple, but develop the ability to see, with terrifying clarity, exactly what each visitor is hiding in the pockets of their soul? And so we arrive at the third and most formidable stage of this metamorphosis, a territory where psychology crosses the border into what seems, at first glance, supernatural. Jung, in his moments of greatest mystical frankness, suggested that intuition is not magic, but a processing speed of the unconscious that the rational mind cannot keep up with. The third power of the healed empath is strategic omniscience. If the mirror effect is the shield and selective empathy is the gate, omniscience is the sword that never needs to be drawn to cut. You become, for all practical purposes, a human lie detector, not because you have developed a divine gift, but for pure and brutal survival. Think about it. When your physical and emotional safety depended for years on correctly reading the atmosphere of the house, predicting the mood of an unstable father, or anticipating a partner's outburst, your brain wasn't just suffering, it was training. You were silently building the most sophisticated behavioral database in existence. Every micro-expression of contempt, every hesitation in the voice preceding a lie, every change in pupil dilation, every contradiction between gesture and word, all of it was archived. And now, with the shadow integrated and the noise of doubt silenced, you have full access to these files. The result is frighteningly accurate. You sit before someone you've just met, someone who smiles and says all the right things, but an old alarm goes off at the base of your skull. You don't think something is wrong. You know they're lying about their past. You know they're hiding a financial intention. You know their kindness is a trap set for 3 months from now. It's as if everyone around you is playing checkers while shouting their moves, and you're playing chess in absolute silence, seeing checkmate 10 moves before it happens. But have you ever stopped to think about the terrible weight of seeing the naked truth all the time? There's a peculiar loneliness in knowing who people are even before they reveal themselves. Jung called this the burden of a differentiated conscience. You see the betrayal forming in a friend's eyes weeks before they betray you. You hear the falseness in a colleague's praise as if it were a dissonant chord in a perfect piece of music. And here lies the darkest and most fascinating twist of this journey, the secret that most empaths are afraid to admit even to themselves. By understanding the mechanics of human manipulation so deeply, you realize you've become capable of manipulating better than any narcissist ever dreamed. You have the complete map of other people's vulnerabilities. You know exactly which word to say to destroy someone's self-esteem, which insecurity to tap into to make someone fall in love or despair. You have the loaded weapon in your hand, and it is on this moral precipice that the healed empath separates himself from the monster. Jung said that true morality is not the inability to do evil, but the capacity to do evil, and the conscious choice not to do it. The naive empath is harmless because he is, weak. The integrated empath is harmless because he is strong. You look at your weapons, your knowledge of the other's fears, your ability to read their minds, and choose to leave them on the table. You could destroy the manipulator by using his own tactics against him, with a surgical efficiency that would leave him on his knees. But you don't. Not because you are afraid, but because you have evolved beyond the need for control. This restraint, this daily choice not to use your power to dominate, is what Jung would call the mark of true psychic royalty. This creates an invisible yet palpable dynamic in any room you enter. People feel it. Liars stammer around you without knowing why. The deceitful feel uncomfortable, as if naked under a bright light. They don't know that you know, but their subconscious knows that your subconscious is watching. You become a monster under control, a force of nature that has chosen peace but carries the storm in your pocket, ready to be used, only if survival demands it. It's a dangerous tranquility. You no longer need to argue. You don't need to prove you're right. You don't need to publicly unmask anyone. You simply observe, smile inwardly, and adjust your course. This strategic omniscience gives you an unfair advantage in almost every human interaction. But the price is the loss of innocence. You can never again be deceived in that sweet and naive way you once were. The veil has been torn forever, and now that you wield the power of the mirror, the steadfastness of the guardian, and the vision of omniscience, the world around you has no choice but to react. The old structures of your life, which depended on your blindness and submission, begin to tremble. What happens when the key piece of a sick system suddenly decides it will no longer play the game? Collapse is imminent, and how the people around you deal with your newfound sovereignty will ultimately reveal who they truly are. And here we arrive at the inevitable climax of this journey, the moment when the empath's inner transformation overflows into the physical world, causing what Jung would describe as an earthquake in the foundations of their social reality. You have shifted the frequency of your soul, integrated your shadow, and shielded your energy field. Now the law of psychic physics demands a reaction. What happens next is not just a change in relationships, it is the structural collapse of an entire system designed to exploit your old weakness. For years, perhaps without realizing it, you were the supporting wall of a doomed building. You were the one who absorbed the tension at family gatherings, who smoothed over conflicts between relatives, who listened to the endless crises of friends who never changed. You were the invisible glue that prevented the dysfunction around you from disintegrating. But now, the healed empath withdraws from that position. You stop holding up the ceiling, and when the supporting wall comes down, the ceiling doesn't float, it collapses. The ensuing reorganization is brutal, swift, and revealing. Your alcoholic father can no longer drink in peace because there's no one to clean up his emotional mess the next day. Your narcissistic mother panics because the trash can where she dumped her frustrations has closed, and now she's forced to swallow her own poison. The immature partner is forced to grow up or leave because you've stopped doing the work of two adults. Understand this. You're not destroying the family or the relationship. You've simply stopped being the accomplice who kept the lie alive, and the reaction of those who benefited from your sacrifice will be the ultimate test of who they really are. Prepare yourself, for this is where the final battle is fought. Jung warned that when an individual begins to individuate, to truly become themselves, the surrounding group, which remains unconscious, feels threatened. They will not applaud their growth. They will try to sabotage it. You will see what psychologists call an extinction explosion. When the manipulator realizes that the old buttons no longer work, that guilt doesn't stick, and that fear doesn't paralyze them, they don't give up immediately. They escalate. They will increase the drama, shout louder, cry thicker tears, invent urgent crises just to see if you still rush to save them. It's a trial by fire for your newfound sovereignty. They will try to rewrite history. Suddenly, you, who gave your all for years, will be painted as the selfish villain, the ungrateful one, the monster who abandoned your own. They will recruit other family members or mutual friends to pressure you back into your submissive position. And in the past, this would have destroyed you. The injustice of being called evil after so much goodness would have made you break your silence to defend yourself, to explain, to plead for understanding. But the healed empath does something that leaves everyone astonished. Nothing. You don't defend yourself. You don't explain. You don't try to convince anyone of your goodness. You understand, with a wisdom that seems ancient, that trying to justify yourself to those who are committed to not understanding you is a vital waste of energy. You accept the role of villain in their story if that's the price to be the hero in your own. This indifference to the opinions of others is the true superpower. You watch the storm of defamation and manipulation swirl around you, but you are in the eye of the hurricane, in absolute stillness. Jung would call this being in the world but not of the world. You see people writhing, desperately trying to provoke a reaction, any reaction, that proves they still have control over you, but you give them nothing. Only the silence of the mirror, the firmness of the guardian, and the gaze of one who knows the truth. And when they realize that neither love nor hate can move you anymore, something changes in their eyes. Real fear appears. They realize they have lost you forever. And it is in this vacuum, in this clean space where manipulation dies for lack of oxygen, that you finally find yourself alone. But for the first time in your life, This solitude is not empty. It is filled with a magnificent presence. You are about to discover what lies on the other side of the abyss, where the pain ends and true life, the one Jung promised was possible, finally begins. What remains when the smoke clears is not emptiness, but fullness. Jung called this final state individuation, the sacred process of becoming an indivisible being, where light and shadow no longer fight, but dance together. You discover the ultimate truth that was hidden beneath your wounds. Your extreme sensitivity was never a curse nor a manufacturing defect. From the beginning, it was military training for your soul. Every moment of pain, every betrayal you felt firsthand, every tear you absorbed was not in vain. You were being forged. The universe was sharpening your perception, hardening your spirit, and preparing you to be something the world desperately needs. A person who can feel the deepest darkness without being consumed by it. The healed empath is living proof of psychological alchemy. You have transformed the lead of trauma into the gold of wisdom. Now the practical application of this in your life is simple, yet revolutionary. You stop trying to save those who don't want to be saved. You understand that the highest form of love is not sacrifice, but example. By refusing to be dragged into the mud, you show others that it is possible to walk on solid ground. You become a lighthouse. A lighthouse doesn't chase after boats to save them. It simply stands still, shining brightly amidst the rocks, and lets the boats decide whether they want to be guided by the light or whether they prefer to collide with the rocks. This is your new posture. You love, but with detachment. You feel, but with discernment. You help, but only those who extend a hand with respect, not those who try to pull you into the abyss. This freedom makes you magnetic. When you stop begging for approval and start approving of yourself, the right people, those who are also on the path of healing and truth, begin to appear. The loneliness you feared disappears, replaced by real, deep, and reciprocal connections. You discover that peace is not a place where there is no noise, but a state where noise can no longer touch your soul. You have become untouchable. Not by building stone walls, but by becoming as vast as the sky, where thrown stones merely pass through the air and fall without hitting anything. If you've made it this far, if these words resonated in the bones of your heart, know that this is no coincidence, it's a calling. The old you, the shock absorber, died so that the sovereign could be born. Don't fall asleep again. Don't let guilt drag you back into the old cages. The world is full of sleeping people who desperately need to see someone who had the courage to wake up. Be that person. Walk with your head held high, trust that silent database you carry within you, and never again apologize for protecting your sacred energy. Make this moment the milestone of your rebirth. I invite you now to seal this commitment with yourself. Leave a comment below, even anonymously, with the phrase, "I am awake." Let these words be your declaration to the universe that the cycle of abuse has ended and the cycle of power has begun. Like this video so that this message reaches other empaths who are still lost in darkness, thinking they are crazy when in fact, they are just undergoing metamorphosis. And subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't just study the mind, we explore the soul. Welcome to your true life. The door is open and this time you decide who enters.